you. Okay, well, I'll quickly pop on my closing presentation. Now, I'm not going to be offended if anyone wants to go out and make a tea or anything, because we don't have a formal afternoon tea. It's absolutely fine. Oops. Okay, so we're back to the tactics. I won't talk too much about this, but I really would like to share it with you. I've got a couple of examples. We did this at our camp in New South Wales with the children. That was the first time we'd used it with children, and we've since launched it in May, and it's been in 4 states, in Tasmania, Victoria, New South Wales, ACT so far. We've had schools use it, and the feedback has been fantastic. So basically, to access tactics, to take it to your school or to your workplace, you can go to our website. There are brochures to download. And how it works, most people think they can just go and download it from their app store. That's not how it works. You can download, what we have is a hosting app that we've built it on, and you download that, but you need to book it in with us because it's location specific and we have to set it up for your school. So you do it through us. So that's the first thing, so for people to be able to get access to it. But just a little bit about this children's version. These are some children doing one of the activities, just to explain how it works. It's fantastic because every child in the school or the class, it can be done a class group, a year group, we've done whole school groups. There's no limit on how many can do it, but they do it in small groups. And it fosters team leadership skills, negotiation skills, collaboration skills. It's peer-to-peer learning. So the child in the school who may have Tourette's is learning at the same time, and in fact being elevated a bit as the expert at the same time, which is really nice for them for self-esteem building. And it's about creating strategies. So it's essentially a scavenger hunt. So there's nothing new about that. Corporate events have used that many, many times, and I've done that with corporate events. But it's a scavenger hunt with purpose and learning attached. So essentially there's a riddle, and I loved that concept because Tourette's is a riddle. No one has the answers, all the answers. So there's a riddle to find a location, and we've got a list of 16 locations that are basically at all schools, like a library, a gym, an oval, a cricket pitch. We've got more than we need because some schools won't have all of them. And the riddle will be something like, gosh, I'm not going to remember one off the top of my head now. I hope you don't go in loops trying to shoot some hoops. And so the children go, oh, the basketball court. So they run to the basketball court, they get a ping on their mobile phone or iPad or whatever it is the school's doing it through. They get some points because they found the location. That opens up now a challenge. So they have to do a challenge and an activity that puts them in the shoes of someone who has Tourette's. And sometimes they don't actually understand why they're doing the challenge. One example is they have to throw a tennis ball. One person throws a tennis ball to another child while their eyes are closed, and they have to try and catch it. And they don't understand what they're doing, but they're having fun and trying to figure out, why am I trying to catch a ball with my eyes closed? And then when they click, and they have to take a little video on the phone or the iPad of them doing it, they upload that. So that's a little bit of evidence or a bit of fun to do. When they've uploaded that, they get more points. And then they get opened up why they did it, and they get the information of, don't worry, you can't catch Tourette's, and nor can you see it coming. And it has a little bit of information about, because that's a big one at school, you know, people fear if they might catch Tourette's if they hang around with this child and things like that. So there's lots of little layers. But I've got a couple of little videos and samples just to show. So I'll play this one.
TS shown as biscuit, sudden, repetitive, and biscuit, involuntary muscle movements, and biscuit, called tics. And biscuit often includes other problems. Tics feel the same as biscuit, trying not to sneeze, and biscuit eventually must come out. Tics become stronger as biscuit, a result of tension or stress, and biscuit happen less with relaxation or concentration.
I'll stop there because it's really loud. But that was one of the challenges they had to do, and it was actually each part of these locations they go to is called a stage, and they're named, and that one was called laugh. So they had to find the laugh stage, and then they had to read a paragraph on the phone once that was their challenge, and after every word of "and," they had to say the word biscuit. So that was like a vocal tick, and a tick that a child might have to have, or while they're reading a story, a silent tick. And then there'd be the explanation afterwards, and it's actually based on a comedian called Jess Toms. That's her tick. And so then it talks about her being funny, and it opens and invites and makes Tourette's a bit more inviting and positive. It's not a negative, and it's okay to laugh with us. We're having fun together doing this. It's different to laughing at us, and so that's one example. And then
TS shows biscuits.
What did I do? I clicked the wrong thing. Then this is one that's, they had to find a playground. They had a clue, and they get to the playground, and one of them has to make movements, and the other children have to copy those movements.
Got to do it for 30 seconds.
This stage is called mimic.
And a bit of dancing. Dance.
So they're just fun ones. And then that one, afterwards it opens up and it talks about echopraxia and echolalia and about the copying and how that type of tick. So it uses it in a fun way and the kids really get it and they start to understand. So this was a school in Sydney we launched it at, and these children were amazing. And I don't know if any of you saw Hayley on Studio 10 for Awareness Week. She was with me at this launch, and the kids just loved her. And we went around the school and they did the activities. And the principal just raved about it. They just were blown away. And the questions the kids had, they really got it. It was really lovely. And a really core reason behind this for me is always going to the why. And this slide here to me is the why. We look at, Tourette's does not affect intelligence, okay? If you look at the school functioning score there, where the average person's school functioning is 90, and a child with Tourette's only is basically almost half, and then a child with TS and something else is 39. That's their school functioning in quality of life score. And the reason behind that is not because they're not smart enough to be in school. The reason behind that is all these other factors we've been hearing about today. And if we can make school an inviting place and a place where they feel comfortable to learn, then we can bring that level up. And this is why this tactics app for me is so important, and I really want to get it into more schools. So they feel really comfortable to talk about it, and it just becomes that thing, like Lou just said, own it. I've got it. This is what I've got. And then move on. And I've been really lucky. I've had 2 children that have known from a very young age they had Tourette's. So they knew they had Tourette's before they started school. We talked about it at all different levels, for their cognitive ability at the time. And in a way I was really fortunate because my son was very scientific minded. So I approached it with no emotion. One day we were walking to school and he'd say, I was really worried because he was talking about all these dark things. He's going, okay, Mum, let's talk about death. And I'm walking to school going, oh, God, how do I talk about what's this mean? I mean, my brain's going, what's going on, what's happening? And then I went, okay, I went to his world. This is science. So I just literally talked about how someone dies. It's just when the physicality, things stop. Their heart stops beating, their brain stops functioning. Took all the emotion out of it. And that's kind of what I did with talking about Tourette's too. It was just this other thing. And it got me through, and I got them through school. And he was such a bright little boy with ADHD as well and all the other things that came with it. But he had self-esteem. And self-esteem got him through. And his mates were there. And also, he didn't really take a lot of notice what was happening. He never got bullied. And I'm not saying other kids ever are the cause of their bullying, but I think it really helped that he owned it. And so nobody could bully him if he owned it. It didn't work. I describe it like telling the punchline so there's no joke. They couldn't make a joke about him. And all his kids supported him. And then This one here was the corporate event version. So it works for corporates as well, just as well, and the learning and depth of it. And that quote there is from the chief financial officer of a very large corporation that did it. And he just was, I think if I can break the CFO of the company and get through to him, then we've really achieved something. So the power of it within the corporate sector was really great. So essentially how it works is we send out, we need the school to fill out a basic form to know what, there's a tick box whether they want a coprolalia stage in it, because some schools want it, some don't. That's the only sort of question we ask about the content. We need a map of their school, and they need to locate those 16 places on the map. Then we can set the pins in Google Earth. This is how it works. We send a test code, it gets tested, and then I publish it and it goes online and they can play it. And they get the score, and all the little videos and photos and things that they upload, they can download and have and show and again and talk about and have fun together and laugh together. And that's what the corporates can do as well, and they loved that. And we made a show reel and played it back to the corporates of them all doing funny things. And they really, really got it. So the reason for needing to help in this area, I talk more from a personal and lived experience as a parent. I actually could have a formal diagnosis of Tourette's. I only know in hindsight that I actually have at least 2 motor tics and at least 1 vocal tic that I've had for more than 12 months. And I reckon I could diagnose the rest of my family. We just never knew it. But it didn't impede my life. It was, it's a spectrum. So it was so small, and I only know it by knowing what I'm looking for. But I'm grateful for having understood it, because I know the feeling of what it's like to try to suppress a tic. I understand that all the throat clearing my family had all our life is actually a tic now. I just thought we all had a lot of, phlegm or something. But it wasn't until I stopped, because I obviously must have a bit of ADHD too. I didn't really stop to observe my body and have the insight of what was going on. So once I stopped, paused and thought about what was going on, because I was forced to for my children, I understood that feeling and that sensation. So I've had a wonderful, wonderful life. It's been so minuscule, but I do realise, listening to Lou and all the other speakers today, that I put in certain strategies implicitly without realising I was doing it to get through. But the things that really affected me was more when it was about my child. So the pre-diagnosis stage of trying to figure out what was going on, knowing something wasn't right, but not knowing something was wrong, was a difficult stage. Then there's the post-diagnosis stage. I went to my GP saying my son has Tourette's because I'd figured it out. And yet when I heard the words back at me, I fell apart. It's really strange. And because I feared the unknown. So then it's about grief. And there was something else we saw today, and the parent was so grief-stricken about the loss. And there was a sense of loss, and you go through that. And everybody goes through the same sorts of things, maybe at different timelines and different phases and stages. And then you think, how is it going to affect the quality of life? There was a time when we didn't go out because of a spitting tic. You can't go to a restaurant, you can't do certain things. You start limiting your life because you don't know how to deal with people in the outside world. But you get stronger and better at it, and going to the support groups, and I got the language, and I actually had what I describe as an epiphany moment. Picking up my son after school, going to the local bakery to buy afternoon tea like everybody else. And a snorting tic was coming out, and a spitting tic. And I was being looked at by everyone around me as the worst parent in the world. Why was I not reprimanding my child? And I almost went to put my arm around him to cuddle him and pull him in. And I didn't. I actually physically set a physical cue. I stood strong, lifted up, put my chest out, raised my head, and was really, really, sorry, I get upset now remembering it, but I made that decision in that very moment to cue the behaviour that everybody else should be doing. And everybody followed me. It was absolutely amazing. I didn't want him to think he was doing anything wrong. And if I'd cuddled him and mollycoddled him, I would have been giving him this message that something was wrong. And from that moment, it was just, everything changed, and I was an advocate. when I had to learn to advocate. It wasn't easy. You know, it's not something I imagined I'd ever have to do. I'd thought my kids had skipped through school like I did, with my parents never having to come to school. I was at school all the time. And at school, you know, I helped out all the time. I was P&C president, I was teaching art there, I was doing everything because it made my child's life easier and better at school. And the school was amazing. We were really lucky. I've heard some horror stories. I've had to advocate for horror stories, and I still do. So I feel really, really fortunate. But I just wanted to share that because it was hearing Lou's story, and it is really true, and I want you all to feel that you can do it. And it's just finding that strength, that inner strength, and that cue. That it's up to us to tell everybody how to behave for the kids. So the impacts on the family are really, really hard. And this is a common story that we feel, you know, brings a lot of tension around home, and the family and the parents working together and the carers working together to be aligned. It affects relationships. Having a diagnosis in our family saved the relationship, I believe, between my son and my father, because it would have just been, in his mind, I think, a discipline problem without that label. So once he's been an amazing grandparent and he's an amazing father, but I don't know I think there would have been a lot of problems there without that label. It affects ability to have income. You know, I always worked, but it certainly affected my own business I had at the time, because I was putting in so much time and effort at the school and doing all these other things and managing sports teams and being super involved to protect and advocate. And that's common. There's statistics to show that parents of children with disability do put in more in terms of those volunteering hours. It impacts socially, it impacts financially, and all that pressure can build up. And I loved one of the comments in Dr. Chen's talk about looking at symptoms. I remember that vividly, where I was filling out all these forms for, you know, all the psychologists and everything at that stage, and I said, all I'm seeing is a symptom. I'm not even seeing my child anymore. So we have to remember to look at the child. So that opening section of your talk was really powerful. The feeling of guilt or blame or helplessness, exhaustion, all of that, and self-worth is a stage most people will go through. It's really complex. It's very changeable, and you need to be fluid, flexible. And as I said earlier today, the day I discovered that it was a journey that was taking me and I let go, everything got a lot easier. And you need to have some respite opportunities. It's harder to leave your child with someone else for fear of them being disciplined. I always knew when my son had had a casual teacher. He came home angry. You know, I didn't have to ask, because he'd been just told off all day and disciplined. He wasn't understood. So what do we need? There's all these services, and hearing that from Dr. Furlong earlier today about, you know, we do have the prevalence rates and the stats and the data now to be able to have greater provision of services for Tourette's, and that's what we're going to be fighting for this year. When we go to our parliamentary friendship group in Canberra, I really want to start. It was actually Chris Cruther that gave me the strength to focus on this, and he said, the numbers will support you, Robyn. Go in and talk about the numbers, because it's really hard to go in and ask, you know, a federal health minister or someone for things when you're, you know, a lay person and you don't necessarily feel you have that power. But when I feel like we're backed by these numbers, it really helps. So we need to provide emotionally safe environments for our kids at school and at home. All the strategies that have been shared today, if we maximise structure and predictability, and have that ability to change because the symptoms change. I mean, Tourette's is, you know, the waxing and waning of Tourette's in particular makes it quite difficult. And the timely intervention, whether it be for ADHD with, you know, circumventing escalation, or the timing of diagnosis, getting in early, the earlier the intervention for anything on all those levels, the better the long-term outcomes. And the trial and error approach, I mean, we have to be creative. And it is hard because you go to school and they say, well, what can we do? And you try something and it doesn't work, and you have to keep trying. And then that works for a little while, and then a new tick comes, and it's a completely different thing. So it's about always being creative, always searching. So we need lots of services. Some of these are from a list that I did with a talk with the NDIS team last year. So things that we need to be able to have functional behavioural assessments to fit into the criteria at some schools. Psychological supports that were talked about today by Elissa earlier on. Self-regulation techniques, sleep habits, social skills development, positive behaviour support plans through awareness training, executive functioning skills. The frontal lobe, what Lou was talking about as well, I liken to the conductor of an orchestra. You can have the most amazing brain, that's all the players in the orchestra, but if that frontal output area, which is the conductor, isn't functioning, the orchestra is lost. So it's about helping with executive functioning, planning and sequencing, attention and concentration. Occupational therapy is really coming to the fore for support for Tourette's. In the past, occupational therapists weren't really in the arena, but they're really a powerful area for support now. Speech therapy, language and communication might be needed, and other educational supports. And parent training opportunities. Don't forget to train yourselves. My husband and I went to a parenting and ADHD training session put on by our local health organisation in the early stages, and I think it was 4 sessions once a fortnight, and that was the most powerful toolbox we got from anyone at the time. It was amazing to hear something about. For an average child, you might have to say something 3 times for it to go from their working memory to their long-term memory. And for a child with ADHD, you might have to say it 30 or 50 times. My level of tolerance just went from, it was fantastic. And my stress went down. So the whole family was happier. So just having that toolbox and those skills for yourselves is really important. And we also have been having to work on housing, emergency crisis housing for adults with Tourette's and for families. We've had families that have had to split up because of, fear of a child hurting another child within a family. Not the parents, but we've actually had to separate children living in families too, which is really, really hard. So there's a lot that goes on and affects these families. So we have to capacity build. Self-esteem, love and self-esteem are the most powerful tools we have, because self-esteem is something the child will take with them forever. A lot of this has been talked about. Our camps are amazing for self-esteem and capacity building. I've seen some huge changes. A child turning up and not walking into the dining room for the first day and a half, and then that child at the end asking their mother, can they live there? They don't want to leave. They just absolutely learn the skills, and they learn that they're accepted somewhere else. That resilience is really important. So if your child can be involved in something outside of school as well, like a school sport that's not with the school, or an art activity or something, so that if something falls down at school, they know they're okay because they've got this other group that accept them, and that's what the camps do. And they all stay in the loop through social media now, outside the camp as well. And the success breeds success we've talked about. But I'd also like to talk about the strengths of Tourette's, and a lot of that's been talked about today as well. And sitting here, I was thinking about listening to Lou about using strengths. There's the Gallup Strength Finder you can do for free online. I'm going to go home and make my son do that, or maybe coerce him and make him think he's doing it. But to find and know your strengths, and then focus on that instead of spending all this time and energy trying to be good at something you don't really want to do and you're not enjoying anyway. I know there's things in life you have to do. Some of this, and there are means to an ends in the society and the system we live in. But if we can actually then also really be aware of where our strengths are, it's a real big help. We've got a lot of really, successful people like Tim Howard, US USA soccer legend, amazing fellow and a really great advocate for Tourette's. Howard Hughes was an incredible entrepreneur. Samuel Johnson, author of the first English dictionary. Robbie Madison is an Australian that was a particular favourite in our household because my son did motocross. You'd watch him and he would, when he's focusing and riding, no tics whatsoever. As soon as he landed and that focus had gone, the tics would start. And OCD, you know, can make you have excellent eye for detail and attention. And one of the comments that came through our chat, which I'd love to follow up with from Rose in Victoria, was, you know, it'd be great to have a list of what our adult community with Tourette's do for jobs and employment to show the diversity of what we can do instead of looking at what might they not be able to do. You know, it's a perspective thing. The common trait of having a strong sense of injustice that comes with rigidity and with OCD-like traits can be really powerful. You know, at the moment, my daughter wants to be a human rights lawyer, and I'm thinking, whoa, she's learnt something along the way. But it comes from that feeling of wanting to do some good in the world and help others. And I don't think that's a bad trait for our kids to have. And that enthusiasm that ADHD has, if you have a great teacher, like my son in year 2 had this most amazing teacher, had to study the life cycle of something, and he chose salmon. And he got into that computer lab room and he was printing out bits of paper and so she could see the passion that was going, and all the other kids ended up looking at him. So the whole class did his, and they had this stream through the floor and a waterfall up the whole thing they did. Together, and she was able to be flexible and go with that, and saw that how he drew all those other kids into his passion. And of course, the personal experience of difference can create empathy for all kinds of difference and just make you a better person and a better human being, and be less judgmental about everybody else. Then the final quote I'd like to end on, is not mine. This is from Professor Valsama Epen. She said at one of our sessions many years ago, actually 10 years ago in Tasmania, I remember, biology does not determine destiny, and I loved that quote. And that's, I think, really the core of what so many of our speakers have said today. It is just biology, it is just who we are, and another thing that Professor Sachdev said to me once about, you know, intelligence as well, it's nothing to be proud of. It's just something you're born with. It's what you do with it that counts. So it's the same with our biology. It's what we choose to do with it that counts, and it's our choice to take it forward. So I'd like to thank you all very much. I've got a lot more, but we don't have time. We've run out of time. But we will be sharing some of the presentations from today with the group, and the live streaming is also being provided as recordings, so we'll look at making sure we can have access to those as well, because I know it's a lot to take in. It's a huge, huge event and day in one session, and I'd like to thank every single person here today, in particular the guest speakers that gave their time so generously to us as a community, to the volunteers. I'd really thank the educators and the other medical professionals that have come today, you know, in their time. You know, when you're an individual and the families with Tourette's, it's wonderful you're here, but to have the support of the other communities and professionals here as well is really something to be very grateful for. So, on that note, I'm happy to close the event. I'm happy to answer any questions and hang here for a little bit longer if anyone's got any. Otherwise, you're all free to go. Or as my husband, who used to be a musician many years ago, would say, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. So yes. The closed Facebook group, Annie, do you know the link? It's called, we'll find it for you. I'll find it. I've got it on my computer. I'll literally look it up and show you. Thanks.